Okay, so officially starting this meeting this evening, my name is Dave Javid with Plan to Place. I'm part of the consultant team, and we're here tonight to talk about the housing element update. This is our second workshop. We're really excited to share some updates with you. But before we get started, what we'd like to do is open our Spanish speaking channel for those Spanish speakers that are here with us this evening before we dive into the meat of the presentation. And with that, I'm going to ask Jasmine to go ahead and read this slide, and then we're going to open up that channel.
Para los que necesitan interpretación en español, por favor, en la parte de abajo de su pantalla van a ver un globo o un símbolo de un globo. Por favor, hagan clic en el icono de interpretación que se ve en la barra de herramientas en la parte de abajo de su pantalla, y ahí pueden acceder el lenguaje que prefieren. Para los que hablan español, por favor, hagan clic en interpretación y escojan el español, y todo se va a poder escuchar en español. Gracias.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. So with that, we now have that channel open for those that would like to follow along in Spanish. We will also have all the materials, including the presentation, translated in Spanish and in Mandarin as well. Those will be posted to the project website at losaltoshousing.org. So just want to make note of that. And then just real quick on some housekeeping items, just going over the logistics. We do have closed captioning available. Obviously, the audio right now is muted just so we don't accidentally speak over each other, but we will have an opportunity to unmute those as we get into the small groups. And if you are dialing in, you could actually use *9 to raise your hand as well. So as I mentioned before, the chat window is open. Feel free, as we're going through the presentation, to give us any comments through chat, and we will have a pause after the main chunk of the presentation to field some of those questions and comments before we roll into small groups. And then we're going to have a larger discussion with you all on the main topics that were discussed, and then come back together. And again, as a reminder, when we get into those small groups, if you did want to unmute yourself to contribute that way, as I mentioned earlier, if we go to the reactions button, there's a raise hand function there, and that'll simply pop up a hand next to your name, and we'll know that you'd like to be unmuted. With all of that background info, I'm going to turn it over to Laura Simpson for a welcome.
Good evening, everyone. I'm happy to see everyone here this evening, and welcome to our second community workshop on the Los Altos Housing Element. And we have quite a bit of new information to present this evening since our last workshop, and I'm so happy that such a great turnout has come this evening. And with that, I will actually turn it over to Lisa Weiss Consulting is our consultant team, along with Plan to Place, and our director and project manager is Jennifer Murillo, who will be presenting this evening. So I'll turn it over to her. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. I'm actually just going to quickly go over the overall agenda, and then I'll hand it over to Jen to get us started. So we've gotten through 1 and 2, obviously, on the list. We are going to get into a presentation on the site analysis that Jen is going to provide. And then as I mentioned earlier, we're going to just do a quick group Q&A through chat, just to field all your comments and questions there and try to answer what we can before we actually jump into small groups. In the small group option, we're going to have all the same material that you've seen in the presentation, an opportunity to kind of dive into each chunk. And then we'll come back and do a report out at the end. Considering there's such a great turnout of folks this evening, we might go a little bit past 8:30 just to provide enough time for the small groups and to give you all enough space to contribute. But just as a reminder, all this information will also be on the project website, along with a comment form that you can give feedback that way as well. And then we'll do a quick report out after that, and then talk through wrap up and next steps. So thank you again so much for joining. And one more thing before we hand it over to Jen to do the presentation is, at every workshop, we like to do a demographic poll just to quickly understand who's joining us this evening. And we ask very standard questions. And really, we do this as an opportunity to understand who's joining us and then who maybe we might be missing, so that we can course correct and make sure that we target folks that haven't had the opportunity to contribute, and make sure that we're representing all perspectives in this process. So with that, and you all did a great job of this last time, I'm hoping you all could follow me along with this tonight, is we're going to actually go onto a Menti poll, and we're going to access that by either going into another window and going to menti.com, and then you're going to put in this access code 27790959, and or I guess you could bring your mobile phone up to the screen, open up your camera and click on this QR code, and that'll actually take you right there, and you could follow along on your mobile phone, and no problem at all. If you can't access this, there will be demographic poll information on the comment form online as well, so you can do that at your leisure whenever you'd like. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing real quick so that I can bring up that window, and then we're going to get your poll going here. And we'll get started. So thanks so much for your patience as I bring that up. Okay, so let me go ahead and re-share my window. And look at that, you already are all gravitating toward there quickly. So I'm gonna leave this up for one more second. Again, as a reminder, if you want to go on a separate window, you're welcome to go to menti.com and plug in this code, and that code will stay on the top of the screen the whole time we're in this poll together. And or you could use this QR code. And again, absolute worst case scenario, no problem. You'll have an opportunity to go ahead and do this at your leisure whenever you'd like. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward in the interest of time. So the first question we like to ask is just a really simple icebreaker, just to make sure, give you kind of a practice run of how this tool works. And it's just a simple question about what you love about Los Altos. And if everything goes according to plan, you will see fun bubble diagrams popping up on the screen as you all give us your input. There we go. So this is going to turn into, hopefully very quickly here, a word cloud that represents what you all are telling us that you love about Los Altos. And you'll see that some of the words that are appearing larger on the screen, as word clouds typically do, are those that have gotten more than one response or many responses. And wow, this is populating quickly. You'll see that friendly, rural, trees, community, people, neighbors have all gotten quite a few votes. Quiet, weather, awesome. You all got the hang of that very quickly. Excellent. So this is just a fun, quick warm up just to get us started, and you'll have access to this to come back to this whenever you like if you want to contribute, and we'll have this as part of the summary after the meeting as well. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and move us forward to the actual demographic questions. And the first question we like to ask is your age. And this is, again, demographic questions, very standardized, something that you probably see in a census. Just to quickly understand who is joining us this evening. And again, to help us as we move forward in engaging other folks in the process as well. Okay, very helpful, thank you. So we're gonna go ahead and move to the next question. And the next is, which is the primary language spoken in your home? Again, just to get a quick sense of this information is helpful. As anticipated, vast majority English. Excellent. Okay, you all can see those results along with me. English, as expected, has the highest votes there. And this next question is, which category best describes you? And this is our standard race and ethnicity questions. And you'll all get to see, as I am, quickly tabulating on the screen. And if you are doing this on your phone, you might actually notice the tabulation happening there as well. But this, as you can see, the results here, fairly interesting mix. Okay, on we go to our next question. Where do you live? This is whether you're in Los Altos, not in Los Altos, but in Santa Clara County or coming in from outside the county. And as expected, vast majority of you live here in Los Altos. Excellent, thank you for that. Our next question is where you work, whether it's in Los Altos, outside of Los Altos, in the county, outside of the county, if you may be retired or you may not work. Okay. Excellent, fairly good balance there. Thank you for that. I'm going to go ahead and move us on here. Next question is, if you work in Los Altos, how long is your commute? I guess if you don't work in Los Altos, it might be a bit longer. Okay. Great to see. Thank you for that. I'm going to keep moving us on here. Next question is, if you live in Los Altos, what is your current housing situation? Whether you own a home, rent a home, live with family. Okay, as expected, vast majority own a home. And then I believe our second to last question is, if you live in Los Altos, how long you've actually lived in Los Altos. Excellent. Wow, vast majority over 10 years. Excellent. And I think we might have, did we already ask this question? We might have asked this question in a different way, but if you live in Los Altos, what type of housing do you live in? Single family home, duplex, apartments? Okay. Vast majority single family home. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe that is the final question. No, it isn't. Last question, I promise. Is, have you participated in a housing element event in the past? And the city's done a fantastic job holding small group meetings, pop-up workshops. We've had one workshop previously as well. So this is just to get a quick sense if this is your first time joining us about the housing element, and it appears actually more than half of you, this is your first time. So we'll have a lot of great information to share with you this evening. So with that, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen again. Thank you so much for taking the time to take that. That's really, really helpful for us to understand who's joining us. I'm going to go ahead and bring the PowerPoint back up and hand it over to Jen to get us started. So Jen, over to you.
Great, thank you so much, Dave. Really appreciate that. It's always interesting to see who we have here. So thank you, everyone. Good evening. Again, I am Jen Murillo with LWC. Next slide, please. And I will provide a quick overview of housing elements and our process before we get into the sites analysis. Next slide. And I think that'll be helpful considering we do have actually a majority of folks participating in their first housing element update event tonight. So just a quick overview, what housing elements are. Housing elements are one of the required sections of a city's general plan. And housing elements assess local housing needs and conditions of local housing stock and show how the city's allocated housing need can be accommodated within the city, and also establish goals, policies, and programs that essentially serve as the city's housing action plan. Housing elements are required to be updated every 8 years. So this is looking at an 8-year period from 2023 to 2031. And housing elements must be approved or certified by the State Department of Housing and Community Development. Next slide. The housing element update process began in the fall, and it's targeting completion at the end of this year. Throughout the process, there will continue to be many public meetings and opportunities for input. And tonight is the second community workshop, second out of 3. And looking ahead, we are targeting releasing a draft housing element for the public's review by the end of April. So looking ahead, that's what we are planning for. Next slide. And public participation is a significant component of preparing this housing element. And the city has offered various formats for feedback and input thus far. That includes focus group meetings, small group meetings, which the city continues to offer and that you can sign up for through the project website, losaltoshousing.org. There have been and continue to be pop-up events, community workshops like this, and more formal events like study sessions and public hearings with the Planning Commission and City Council. Other media formats have been used too, postcard, which you all likely received, letters, emails, and through the website, there's a comment form there that folks can go on and provide comments, questions at any time. And then comments that have been received and continue to be received, we are reviewing. Those will inform and be integrated into the draft housing element that we're looking to release at the end of April. Next slide. Now there are, these list some of the required components that the housing element will include and address. Tonight, we are focused on the site's inventory and that analysis. Now, on the website, losaltoshousing.org, you can find out more information about state law and requirements for housing elements. But tonight, we did want to be focused and dedicate some time for a portion that we've heard a lot of interest in, which is the site's inventory. And that site's inventory is the identification of parcels suitable for accommodating housing in compliance with state law. Next slide. So now getting into some of the requirements, as well as the analysis which we're underway with on the site's inventory. And what we're presenting tonight, and this presentation was posted and made available on Friday, we're looking at this as a starting point or a preliminary point for discussion and getting your feedback, making revisions, and folding that into the draft housing element. So we look forward to all your feedback tonight. Next slide, please. Thank you. So what we're looking to solve through the site's inventory analysis is addressing the regional housing needs allocation, or RHNA. This is the number of units that each city must plan for through their housing element. And the city's RHNA is 1,958 units. And that RHNA is divided up into or among different income levels. Those ranging from market rate units or above moderate units at 843 units, and the remaining units being below market rate. So moderate and lower income units, that's about 1,115 units. So this is the capacity that we're looking to identify for through the site's inventory. Next slide. So the site's inventory is it's a documentation, it's a demonstration of appropriate and adequate zoning to accommodate that RHNA. It looks at capacity, it looks at existing conditions. And state law does not require that the city construct the RHNA on the identified sites. It will still be up to property owners to determine future development proposals. So this is more of a capacity analysis consistent with state requirements. In line with that, the state Department of Housing and Community Development, HCD, has issued guidance for how these sites inventories should be prepared. And our approach is to stay consistent with that guidance and provide and develop an inventory that meets those criteria and expectations. So the state's guidance, some examples of the ways that we're looking to comply with guidance issued from the state include, for example, how we project accessory dwelling units, or ADUs, over the 8-year planning period. So the state recommends that The city look at ADU building permit trends since 2018 and carry those forward. So using that approach, we have about 340 units of ADUs projected. We also can look at projects that are in the pipeline, meaning they're approved projects that haven't been completed, they're projects under review, and they're projects that won't be completed or won't have a certificate of occupancy before June 30th. And so these projects can be credited towards the RHNA capacity and counted based on the number of units that are being projected or approved at those income levels that are also being projected or approved or under review for entitlement. So ADUs and pipeline projects are treated differently than housing sites. Housing sites are mapped and units are projected on those sites based on what's considered, assumptions for realistic capacity. So capacity is not the maximum density that could be allowed. It's not considering factoring in inclusionary housing or density bonus. And this is because the state wants to ensure that the underlying zoning is appropriate to accommodate housing, particularly for lower income housing. Now, non-vacant sites, that's a term that HCD uses, and that's describing parcels that truly aren't vacant. Even a property with a surface parking lot is considered non-vacant. And the state requires non-vacant sites to have realistic potential. This means they're underutilized, and there are market conditions and development trends that indicate potential of redevelopment or the addition of housing on the site. So our approach, our intent is to be conservative in our analysis and prepare an inventory that fully adheres to the requirements and guidance from the state. Next slide. So there's multiple methods to demonstrate RHNA capacity, our accessory dwelling units, our pipeline projects, and then housing sites. And again, our focus tonight is on sites, parcels suitable for housing both vacant and non-vacant. Next slide. So our first step in looking at potential sites for Los Altos was to do a comprehensive screening of all parcels in the city and screening them based on a standard set of criteria. Those included that the zoning allows for residential, that it's not a site that has a pipeline project planned or approved on it, so we're not double counting. It's not a historic resource. It's vacant, or the improvement value is low. The improvements are valued, below the land value, indicating potential underutilization. If there's existing structure that is older, it's 40 years or older, built in 1980 or earlier, and that the existing use isn't something that may preclude housing or be a tough sell to HCD. These are things like utility operations, gas stations, national fast food chains, things like that. And again, non-vacant sites have to have residential development potential. So this also includes looking at and removing sites that have long-term leases and no property owner interest in developing housing. Next slide. So after going through a comprehensive screening, then it's looking about how are the income levels identified for specific parcels that have passed through screening. And that again is going back to guidance from the state. Sites that are identified for lower income housing must be at least a ½ acre and allow density of at least 30 units per acre. Now, actually, the city, under current guidance, could actually project lower income capacity at a 20 unit per acre threshold. But the city is being conservative, using 30 units per acre as a threshold based on the 2020 census and densities observed for lower income projects. Now, there are a lot of mixed-use zones in the city that don't have maximum densities. And so in those cases, we're looking at the pipeline projects that are being developed and coming in for entitlements with the city, and looking at the density trends of those to be able to have an indication of categorizing sites according to income level. So still using that 30 units per acre as a criteria for income determination of lower income. Moderate income sites would allow for lower densities, looking at 20 to 29 units per acre, and then market rate sites would be below that, fewer than 20 units per acre. So that's different than how we look at projecting the number of units then on those sites. And it's about being conservative with looking at 70% of the maximum density or trends to project the number of units for the identified or potential sites. So for example, along El Camino Real, we have the commercial thoroughfare zone that has a maximum density of 38 units per acre. 70% of that would be 27 units per acre. So for those parcels identified in, along El Camino Real, in the CT zone, projecting 27 units per acre is applied to conservatively project the number of units, even though development trends are showing higher densities. So again, in line with our conservative approach for the inventory. Next slide. So through this analysis, through our preliminary analysis here, we've estimated that over 80% of the RHNA could be accommodated through existing zoning, accessory dwelling units, ADUs, and the pipeline projects. So the shortfall we're finding is in lower income and market rate categories of around 360 units. Now we know the city wants to include some level of buffer. So we're estimating that we should look at approximately 500 units capacity to be addressed through some level of change in zoning standards. Now, tonight is the presentation of this preliminary analysis as a starting point for feedback. We're here to get community input. So we've got some ideas we're going to talk about based on some feedback we've heard for some ideas for how zoning standards could be changed to help tackle looking at some additional capacity. But then we also have some information, some maps that identify the sites that have passed through our screening and the income levels identified based on this methodology that's consistent with the state's guidance. And those are identified based on no changes to existing zoning. So we want to get everybody's feedback and make adjustments accordingly. And later this month, we'll be going to council on March 22nd so that council has an opportunity to take a look at this as well and give us feedback. So let's see. So with that, we'll go to the next slide. So some ideas or considerations for how we can accommodate some additional capacity, look at various zones, and I'll go through each one of these and we'll talk about these in our breakout rooms. And we expect there's other ideas that will come up tonight to consider as well. But these options don't include any changes to the R1 zones. Next slide. So the first option that we wanted to talk about is focusing on along El Camino Real and that commercial thoroughfare zone. So that's what's shown in red here, which is just primarily along El Camino Real. And as I mentioned, this area has a maximum density of 38 units per acre, but developments are coming in much higher, ranging from 50 units to over 100 units per acre. So this option is looking at allowing higher density in this zone along El Camino Real and establishing a minimum density. That developments that come forward with residential must include at least a certain amount of density. And through those ideas, we're looking at having a net new capacity of anywhere between 50 to 130 units. Now, no, this isn't looking at all the parcels along El Camino Real. This is just focusing on net new capacity on those parcels that have passed through the screening criteria along El Camino Real. Next slide. There are 3 parcels in the public and community facilities, or PCF zone, that have been raised as potential candidate sites. These are 2 church sites off of Magdalena Avenue. They're about 6 acres each. And although they're developed, they do have surface parking areas that could potentially be converted into housing, especially considering legislation encouraging housing on religious institution properties. Then another parcel on the right-hand side here is a vacant city-owned parcel at the corner of Grant and Fremont. This parcel is just over half an acre. Although it's not developed, it is designated as parks in the general plan. And these parcels, if we allow residential on these could allow a pretty big range of units, looking at between 10 to 260 unit capacity. Next slide. The office administrative zone is located a few places in the city. It's shown on in dark purple here. This covers a few parcels back from El Camino Real. It's located in a segment on the east side of San Antonio, east of downtown, and then a few parcels on Foothill and on Altos Oaks off of Foothill. This is a zone that does not allow residential today. It's office administrative. So if we allowed residential in this zone, we estimate this could provide a capacity of between 150 and 250 units. Next slide. The commercial retail sales zone is located in the core of the downtown. This is along Main Street, State Street, First Street, as it's shown in violet. And while residential is allowed, development trends are limited in the downtown and show lower density. So establishing a minimum density requirement here could allow slightly more units to be projected. However, the maximum height of 30 feet is going to be problematic for demonstrating adequate zoning for mixed use. So therefore, looking at allowing at least 3 stories is an option, or alternatively, allowing 100% residential. But 100% residential is likely not desirable, as we want to preserve commercial downtown. So this option is estimated to net capacity of 25 to 60 units, but really there's over 100 units potential projected here that would rely on that potential height modification. Next slide. And then the last idea to think about is the Loyola Corner specific plan area. This is off of Foothill, around Fremont, Lorraine, Miramonte. This area is unique. It has a 20-unit cap for new residential development, and there's a current pre-application in for 12 units. So the capacity could only be 8 units here in this area. So a fair amount of, without any types of change to the standards. So a fair amount of capacity could be achieved here if we remove that cap in density. But similarly to the downtown, the CRS zone, this has a 30-foot height limit. So we would want to look at, or at least consider, talk about with you all, either the potential for increasing the height to at least 3 stories, or would we want to allow 100% residential to make this potential additional capacity be considered, be realistic here. Next slide. So again, these maps were posted with a presentation on Friday. Again, these show a preliminary and starting point for discussion. It shows the parcels that pass through the screening analysis. with those income categories based on the HCD criteria for size and density. And then it also identifies parcels that could be candidates based on the modifications to zoning options we've mentioned here. So again, this is a documentation of capacity. This is not, state law does not require the construction of affordability units on the sites identified, but it is looking at the capacity for the units to be able to be provided consistent with state law. So we expect changes to these. We're looking for feedback. We'll probably have, we'll have sites added, we'll have sites removed. So we want to talk about that. So this map here, this is the northern portion of the city along El Camino Real at the top. Next slide. Here, this is the sort of northern central area of town. This is includes downtown. Here we've got a mix of moderate and market rate capacity, again, based on the limited development trends in downtown, but some rezoning options here that could increase that and alter, give some opportunities maybe for lower income as well. And next slide. Here we have, again, these are all available on the website too. I'm sure you all have, you may have them in front of you already too, so I'll just go through them quickly. The next one here, this is the south central portion where potential sites are primarily located along Foothill. And this area identifies some more potential options for the rezoning concepts we mentioned. Next slide. And lastly, this is the southern portion. This also has potential sites along Foothill. I will briefly mention the 2100 Woods Lane. This is the larger green site here. This is unique in that it does have a preliminary application on it in process with the city, which would make it be a potential candidate for a pipeline project. But because we're being conservative, we're instead identifying it as a site with a much lower density. Next slide. So just in summary, the zoning modification options we're talking about here do provide a capacity range that could address the estimated RHNA shortfall, including a buffer. So at this stage, we're looking for feedback on these ideas and our preliminary analysis to help us make refinements and incorporate those into the draft housing element. So thank you again for your time. We really look forward to your questions and discussion. Thank you. Next slide, Dave.
Great, thank you so much, Jen. We've had quite an influx of comments coming in through chat. Most appear to be comments that I would love to move into the small group discussion and get any questions answered. I will say just kind of the higher level questions about whether the answers to questions will be summarized and distributed. I believe that was in reference to the demographic poll, and those definitely will be as part of the summary. You'll see graphs of all those answers, and we will summarize all the input received through chat and through the hand raised when we go into the small groups. That'll also all be summarized and available after the workshop so that you all will have access to that information. Laura, there was one question in particular that I know there's a couple questions about the RHNA.
The RHNA, I thought we saw a few questions, maybe Jennifer, if you just want to explain how those numbers come to us, or who designates them. I mean, we know it's from the state through Association of Bay Area Governments. Can you just mention how?
Sure. So there's a regional needs determination that comes from the state to the region. That's the number of units the region needs to plan for. And the Association of Bay Area Governments, or ABAG, then allocates that number to the Bay Area jurisdictions. And there was a lengthy process for ABAG to develop the methodology for allocating those within the jurisdictions in the Bay Area. And there's a full report documenting that on the ABAG website. There's a link from the FAQ section on our website to that. The city of Los Altos did appeal the RHNA determination, as many jurisdictions did. That appeal was denied, as almost every jurisdiction's appeal was as well. So that solidified the RHNA number that we're working with.
Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you, Jen. And in the interest of time, and I just want to note in the chat, looks like there's a lot of dialogue going back and forth. I just ask that you all continue to stay respectful of each other and create a safe space. It looks like in most part we have, but it's great for you all to kind of be able to provide feedback to each other again, if it's in a respectful way. But I feel like there's been more comments there than questions, and I would love to get those comments into the small groups. We have about 135 participants joining us. So I'd like to now break us actually into the small group so we can dive in deeper, get your questions, hopefully answer the best way we can, and take any additional comments, both again through hand raised and or through the chat window. So as I mentioned earlier, when you get into the small groups, the mics will still be muted so we don't accidentally speak over each other. But if you use the hand raise feature, which you could find in the reactions button on the toolbar at the bottom of your window, that'll give you an access to raise your hand there, and then your facilitator will go ahead and unmute you when it's your turn to speak, and or you could physically raise your hand if your video is on, and we'll get to you that way as well. And then you also will continue to have the option to leave any chat comments, and you'll see when we get into that group, there'll be a whiteboard up with the question or discussion prompts up, the maps as a resource, and then all the questions that are coming in will also be on that whiteboard, so you could all see it and we can work through and facilitate the conversation together. And again, given the size of the group, I anticipate we might actually go a bit past 8:30. So I really appreciate your patience if we do go a bit over. Just want to provide enough space for you all to contribute. So with that, I do see a couple of hands raised. I'm going to ask if you could just hold those questions for the small groups as we move into them. What I'm going to do next here is click a button, and that's going to open up a few rooms. There's a few of you that actually might stay here with us in the main room, and then the rest will be moved into 3 other rooms, and we'll all come back here at the end to do a report out. And before we move into the small groups, and I'm going to ask those that did raise their hand, I'm going to lower your hands real quick because I want to ask those that are following along through our interpreter in Spanish, if there is anyone following along that channel, if you can actually use the hand raise feature at this point to let us know that you would like to continue to follow along through that channel, because Jasmine is going to stay here in this main room. So I'll make sure that I don't move you into one of the other rooms. I'm just going to give that a quick second. I don't see any hands raised. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and open those rooms. Facilitators, note takers, you're automatically moved into those rooms as well. Let me just see if I can even them out a little bit, as it typically happens as soon as I say small groups. We had a few people that left, so I just want to even out the rooms here a little bit if I can before we launch in. Okay, I think we're in pretty good shape, so go have a great time, and we'll see you back here hopefully in about a half an hour to have a great report out and talk through next steps and then send you on your way. So thank you again, and we'll see you soon. We have everyone back with us now. Again, thank you so much for spending this evening with us. In the interest of time, we're just going to very quickly hit on key themes from each one of the groups. I'm going to ask the facilitators of each group and or someone that they might want to have do the summary to very quickly hit on the highlights of what your group discussed. And then we're going to talk a bit about next steps and then hopefully send you on your way here shortly. So with that, I might just go straight in order and start with you, Jen. So you're up.
Yeah, thank you so much. So we had a good discussion. There were a lot of comments in chat, so I can't possibly cover everything that was mentioned in our group, but we had some themes about the concept of making sure below market rate units were spread across the city, and that we looked at mixed income developments. But some initial feedbacks were, feedback was, looking at increased density along El Camino Real may be okay, but concerns about integrating height and buffering with adjacent neighborhoods and just the overall impacts of, light, comfort, urban feel with increased height. We had concerns about, being sensitive to churches, protecting those properties and communities, some interest or feedback that increased height going up to 3 stories in certain areas may be okay depending on how it's designed. And in some cases it wouldn't be okay to go up to 3 stories. And then we had some concern about any changes to Loyola Corners, that there was some community input and work that went into the standards that are in place today, and that fits the neighborhood. So a lot more comments, but quick snapshot there.
Great. Thank you so much, Jen. Yeah, and as Jen mentioned, there were many comments and conversations going on in chat, all of which we will grab and put into the summary when this all comes together. So we can make sure that all that input was captured as well. So next we'll go to Dave.
So we had a really good, productive group. There were a couple of themes that came out. There is concern about the interface between single-family residential zones and any zone that might see a change in its development standards. So that interface is something that came up. Another issue is height. There's concerns about considering the probable use of the state density bonus in creating taller buildings. And then there was concern about height along El Camino Real and in the downtown triangle becoming excessive. And the definition of excessive varies from person to person. But in general, concerns about height. So on the whole, good input from our group and a request to be cognizant of that interface between higher intensity development and single family residential neighborhoods and a concern about height generally.
Great. Thank you for that, Dave. Next, we'll go down the line to Laura.
Yes, we had some general themes that there was a lot of support for density along El Camino, increasing the density as well as along San Antonio and even the height, and allowing for residential uses within the OA as well. So that was all supported, and also including looking at the downtown parking plazas and really, showing the city would need to show some positive effort or initiative to do something with that area. We can't just put it in, but there needs to be a program associated with those parking plazas if they are to be included that would really, create housing. So there was a lot of support for that, a walkable downtown, higher density along those main corridors. And but with the churches, there was a little concern that maybe that those weren't necessarily in the best location, or maybe they wouldn't be interested. But they also mentioned there are other churches around the city that might be you could reach out to, but they might have less land available. So that was something else that came up. And that was it, but a lot of great comments, and we captured a lot of comments from that group. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Laura. Last but not least, Stefano, if you want to give us a quick.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Yeah, we had a lot of really good participation, so I want to thank everybody who spoke. I also want to apologize to those that we were not able to get to. We had so much participation. So I would say, please look at the website, losaltoshousing.org. We have a link to the feedback form as well, where you can provide additional comments. So thank you very much. Just a few things that we talked about here. Many people expressed interest in seeing the preliminary sites list. That's something that will be available once the public review draft goes out at the end of April. So I know very many people are anxious to see that and to be able to wrap their heads around numbers and methodologies and things like that. Another theme that really came through was outreach to property owners. The city currently is engaging in a lot of outreach to property owners, and people want to see that continue in terms of whether or not sites that are identified, the property owners there are actually interested in additional housing there. Another thing that came up is the height. people are concerned about increasing heights, also density bonus concerns, and concerns about adding housing in the Loyola Corner specific plan. People were in favor of more density in the downtown area. At least we got a few comments related to that. And there were concerns related to impacts to schools and traffic that will be addressed through the CEQA document, but that's something else that came up. So thank you.
Great, thank you. And again, thank you all so much for taking the time with us this evening and all of the fantastic input. So before we leave, I just want to turn it back over to Jen to talk a little bit about next steps and again, how to continue to stay involved and provide input.
Thanks so much, Dave. Yeah, over the next month or two, we're going to continue doing offering outreach. The city is doing small group meetings too. If you're interested in signing up for those, you can sign up for those at losaltoshousing.org. And then we are working on preparing the draft housing element. The feedback that you give us tonight, we're going to look at, respond to, and we're going to move forward to a council update and considerations on March 22nd. So the council will see this information you've seen tonight. We'll report out on some comments we've heard and start getting the council's feedback on where we're at. Look for the draft housing element coming out at the end of April. But between now and then, if you have any questions, comments, Dave, we go to the next slide. We could please go to losaltoshousing.org. We're continuing to update the FAQs there. So look for more information there and sign up for emails. I think you're probably already on the email list, but you can go to the website to get email notifications for meetings that are coming up too, and send any questions or other comments over to Housing Element at losaltosca.gov. We so appreciate your time tonight. This was really productive. Thank you.
And I just wanted to add one thing. I'm very happy to see such a great turnout this evening and great participation. That's wonderful. And some new faces. I've met a lot of you through the small group for the housing elements, but many new faces as well. So thank you for coming.
Excellent. Thank you all again. Have a great evening, and we hope to see you all again soon. Thank you all. Good night.